Todd, we've known each other for years, and I've always been a big fan of your work. I'm a bigger fan of the human being you are, but like I'm so thrilled that you're bringing this book out because negotiation is one of those things that people get all tied up in their heads about. And there are so many conflicting viewpoints and pieces of advice. And what I've always appreciated about your approach to negotiation is it's like, look, I know what I'm here for. I know what I provide, and I know when I can walk away. Does it need to be any more complicated than that?
As a matter of fact, it needs to be just like that. And so when we say this, it's funny that the historical lens at the way that we negotiate was born at a time when, in the 1970s, you knew I was going to get nerdy. There was something called the Consumer Protection Act that took our economy from a fair trade environment that really protected the manufacturers from deep discounting to free trade, which protected the consumers. So you went overnight into a world where you had to learn to negotiate. And so the techniques and approaches that were born at the time were born at a time when the deal was the peak of the selling relationship, right? You sold it, you moved on. The reason why I say it has to be this way is in today's environment, the sale is no longer the peak of the relationship. It's merely an early milestone on the path to having customers who buy, they stay, they buy more. It's your reputation. They advocate for you. They take you with them to their next companies. And I just don't believe it's sustainable to have every one of your customers paying a different amount based on how good or bad you are at negotiating. I just don't think that's sustainable. I also don't believe it's sustainable that we're changing personalities at the goal line of our deals, going from building relationships and focusing on customer outcomes to information asymmetry where I'm hiding details from you and I'm focused on my own outcomes. And so, again, I believe that we need a structure for the way that we deliver, propose, and negotiate our pricing so that pricing becomes consistent with the flexibility lying within the four levers that I talk about in the book.
You and I sell to sales leaders and executive sales leaders, sometimes just even operational executives at companies, depending on the industry and things like that. It used to be that you would work for these companies, especially at the time period that you're talking about. And I brought you here to nerd out. Don't tell me that not to expect that. But at a time when you worked for a company for 25, 30, 40 years, they gave you a gold watch and a nice bonus to send you off into retirement, and then you rode off into the sunset. Now, the people that we work with and call on are in seat for 18 to 24 months. It's like, do we not expect these people to talk to one another? Do we not expect these people? And you've even written about this at length, that one of the best ways that you can grow, if you do it right, is when your companies do, or your customers do eventually leave that company, and they hopefully take you with them to the next company. Like, this is a growth strategy. And it feels like, I mean, to the point that you're making, without the transparency, without laying those cards on the table and negotiating in good faith, which is what that is, without putting that out there, you're essentially shooting yourself in the foot of your own, one of your own, certainly, best growth strategies. And it's a strategy I talk about a lot, right? This goes beyond referrals. This is not just a referral. Not I'm going to recommend that you go over there. I'm going to take you with me. Why haven't people recognized this till this point? And what
It's
do you think are the forces that keep people locked in these antiquated methods?
Well, I think your point where you said that these revenue leaders, they're in the role for 18 months. And so we discounted a deal. Okay, cool. We made our quarter. I get to keep my job for another 3 months. I'm going to stay. It's that short-termism that's the problem. But to your point, we had just talked about, like, I just did a massive workshop for 540 people, negotiating workshop. It was a 6-hour day. They all went through it. And it was funny. It was in the cyber technology space. And a couple of people had said two things. Number one, that, hey, these chief information security officers, CISOs, they get together and we know they talk about, hey, when you talk to that vendor, ask for this because I got it. when, again, it's a race to the bottom. But the other piece of it is as I'm working on this and prepping and I'm sharing this stuff with that group, I'm showing them that ChatGPT and the AI world is exposed their pricing model and exposed this stuff too, right? So there is no more expensive way to accelerate a deal. And ironically, your discounting is decelerating the deal because the customers are asking for more, looking for more, talking to their friends. It's slowing things down. So why haven't we gotten to the point where we fix this? Again, your point about short-termism. But the long game wins the long game, and it will win the short game for you too, because when you do it right, you're going to be hitting your targets a lot easier because your average deal sizes are going to go up because those people haven't been discounted dramatically down. Your deals speed up and become more valuable.
There's how often do you see negotiation as a last line of defense because, to what you just referenced, it was a poor fit customer to begin with?
All the time. Yeah, it becomes that kind of thing, right? There's so many things that I'm working through and working out. But again, if you get stuck in your own bubble where this is the way you've always been taught, and this is my organization, like when I talk about this stuff in an audience, when I'm presenting it to 500 people or whatever, I can see brains finally going, right? Like they're looking at this and going, wait, that, of course, that makes perfect sense. What have I been doing? I'll give you one example. I was doing a workshop for a client. This was last year in Denver. And I remember walking in, and I had been working with the sales leadership team in enablement, but I hadn't met the CRO. I get there, CRO comes up to me. He's like, Todd, you're going to love what we had implemented here. You know what we started doing? When we get a deal, when a rep closes a deal above list price, we're going to give them a bump on their commission. And I was like, what? Like, no, like, are you crazy? Imagine if that customer that you paid above list price for, imagine if they find out. Again, they're talking to their buddies, they're hanging out. Like, how much you, wait, I'm paying list price? I'm paying above list price? The lie, that multiplies by 10x. You got that deal. Yay, good for you. You got a couple extra bucks. Yay, good for you. It's going to cost you 10, 20, 30 deals in the future that you never even knew existed because your reputation is going to go in the garbage, right? And when I explained it to him, and I did it much nicer than that. I wasn't yelling and spitting at him.
That was your inside voice, not your outside voice, right?
He looked at me and he was just like, yeah, that's a good point. I'm going to stop that right now. Right? Like there's so much of that we do inherently, but it's just because we haven't really looked at it through the lens of the customer, the environment, and the sustainability of your revenue and your business.
It feels like the more we talk about this, the more this comes down to this dichotomy between short-term thinking and long-term thinking. And, particularly as tools progress, particularly as really, quite frankly, transparency into the inner workings of these companies progresses, I think in some ways it really forces more of a short-term thinking, a philosophy or fundamental, which is unfortunate. And, it's interesting that it's the access to all this data that makes everything more urgent. But we go back to the negotiation standpoint of this. What you're doing is blowing the minds of the people in your audiences. That's clear. It hit me squarely between the eyes. A lot of it was stuff that always just made sense to me, but I was afraid to say out loud. And I imagine that's what a lot of executives are hearing and feeling when they listen to you. But I got to also imagine that there's an old guard that is a little upset by this, maybe feathers being ruffled by this. Like, wait a second, I had the market cornered on how am I supposed to do that, Todd? And all of a sudden, now here comes this guy out of, Chicago who's saying I can, be totally transparent. I can negotiate in good faith. I can feel good about myself and keep the profit margin. This feels like heresy, which might mean you're onto something. But, what else are you hearing from your fellow negotiation experts out there?
Well, it's funny. I don't read new books, right? Like for anybody who's watching this, I'm a nerd for the history of sales. Everything I read is 100+ years old because I believe most of the ideas are 100 years old already anyway. There is one current or modern book that I did read, and it's called Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. And I think it's brilliant, right? It's a
It's
brilliant
very
book,
good.
right? It's really, really good. It combines FBI intrigue and drama with behavioral science, with sales. I love it. But here's my feel like, why would I write another negotiating book if there's a classic one out there? Why would I write a book where if I was in a crisis negotiation, Chris Voss would have me tased in 5 seconds? Like I would get destroyed, right? The guy's masterful.
Yeah.
Here's the thing, that stuff has a place. It is designed for crisis negotiating. It's designed for high stakes negotiating, maybe not crisis, but you got something going on where you gotta win, right? Again, it says mutual, but they're trying to win,
Hmm.
right? Again, a bank heist, if you go in and you're trying to release 10 hostages from a bank heist, winning is not saying, hey, just give me 5 of them. You can go ahead and kill the other 5, right? Like
Right.
that would be stupid. I need all 10. There's absolutely a place for that. I just believe a couple of things. Number one, that there are concepts in there that are brilliant, but I call them word art. And that sounds negative, but mirroring, labeling, collaborated questions, like that kind of stuff, I believe they're very hard to scale, first of all, but they lend themselves to misuse in sales organizations very quickly. And like I said, the result can often be every customer paying a different amount based on how well or poorly you did it. And worst case, it erodes trust because even in Voss's book, there is a line in there where he talks about a conversation he had with somebody where he says, that person used my own trick on me. And I'm like, trick, gimmick? I believe magic tricks and that kind of stuff should be saved for your junior high students' birthday party and not in the B2B world. Like, just keep it there. Again, what I'm trying to teach is something that when I have taught it, when I even started teaching it, I had individuals whose sales experience was they had a lemonade stand in junior high using this stuff an hour later, right? It's designed to be very easy, very, of course, and feel good. You're not eroding trust. You're building it. You're not discounting. You're giving flexibility. And if you play it right, your forecast gets more accurate too.
Oh, well, and that's the thing right there. I mean, how many of these, and there is a place where I think high leverage, scratch and claw for every penny makes sense. I think about the mergers and acquisitions world in some ways. I
Yes.
think about investment banking in that way. I think there are places where that is appropriate. I do think, though, that there are a lot of salespeople out there who confuse themselves with investment bankers and M&A
Right.
strategists and specialists. And I think what you're talking about is raising the floor reasonably on a large number of sales professionals to increase their transparency, deliver better results, feel better about the way that they do it, build more loyalty and more profit and more repeatability into their business. And all of that at the end of the day leads to like us just feeling better about humanity, right? Like, I mean, that's a pie in the sky goal, but you're certainly working toward that, right? And I think the difference between what do I really need versus what looks cool and, what was the really clever line that he or she said? I want to find a way that I can use that too. It's like, what's the point, right? I think we have to consider that.
Well, I'll tell you what something that had happened. This is probably a year ago. I was working on a deal with a large manufacturing company, billion-dollar plus, and I give them the contract to do this year-long program with them. And they added a paragraph to my contract, and it's essentially what's called most favored nation language, which
Yeah.
means they reserve the right to audit if they believe that they're paying more than any other customer. And they needed me to guarantee that they're paying the same or less than everybody. And so when I say that, there's a lot of people that are like, "Oh, gosh, there's no way. Like, oh, I'd fight that, right?" And when they delivered it, they even are like, hey, we put this in here. We kind of need it. And my response immediately was like, that's cool. And they're like, what? They're like, yeah, that's fine. Right? Because when you do this right, you can feel comfortable that they were paying less than everybody because they were making a massive investment, right? Volume is one of the four levers. Buy more, better, it reflected in your pricing, paid for in the form of a discount, right? And so I showed them that, like, hey, here's the structure. When you move a lever, that helps you. And so I feel comfortable that you are paying the same or less than everybody based on what you are investing in. And they were like, we love you.
Yeah.
Signed, right? Like, and that's what you want. Again, short game thinking, we think, ironically, that discounting accelerates, it decelerates. And they think that giving away accelerates. Well, it turns out me just saying, cool, it was the thing that accelerated. Trust accelerates over discounts.
Imagine that. I think one of the things that I haven't heard you say, maybe it's in the book, but I haven't heard you say this yet. And that's the idea that if you don't have to worry about price or where to price it or how much to ask, how much of a relief is that for you as a rep to have one less thing to keep you up at night? Sorry for the old trope, but like of all the things out there, if once that is set and you know, hey, look, this is what people have, we're paying per seat, we're paying per region, we're paying for whatever, per product, you know, guarantee, rebates, incentive, whatever. Here's what your price is. I don't
Yep.
have to worry about that now.
Mm-hmm.
The thing about value pricing that is so wonderful is that it's appropriate for who you're selling it to. The problem with value pricing is how do you know where to set it? And so if you can standardize that, and I say this, and I know you and I are in the same boat, like how do we know what to charge? Once that thing is off your plate and you've committed to it, man, so many other things fall into place and so many other things become clear. And that's the fascinating part.
Remember, the term sticker shock has never been associated with anything good in the history of humankind. And so I've always been a believer that we should be setting a range very early as well. That, hey, listen, before we get too deep into this, my understanding of your environment, and again, it's an outside view, but your investment's probably going to be between X and Y. And if that's way off of your expectations, can we start to address that now versus later? Because if you're talking about a 6 or a 7-figure solution to a 4 or a 5-figure buyer, or vice versa, one of you is in the wrong conversation. Why not set that expectation early? And again, the old school, in one of these books, there's a quote that says, never share the price until the customer thinks it's more. That's gross. Stop it, right? Like, that's not the case. That's not how people buy. We need to understand, is the juice going to be worth the squeeze? And if we have no visibility into the squeeze, we can't even possibly process the nutritional value and flavor of the juice. So set that expectation early, get that anxiety out. It literally turns the negotiation much easier in the end when you've done that right.
Yeah. So, Todd, if this book were to come with a warning label, what would it say?
It would say that this is purpose built for B2B selling situations, commercial terms there. Don't use it in a hostage crisis. I make a joke about this idea that, these old movies where there's like these negotiation things and all of that. One of my jokes is I put the book next to, one of the hero in one of these movies, and it's like the negotiator, and he's holding the book, and then under it says, everybody dies, right? Because again, it is not designed for negotiating releases of hostages, warring nations, crisis situations. That's not what it's meant for. It is purpose built for the B2B world. I also believe that there are elements of it that could be used for B2C, could be used for one-off. You're going to buy a car, you're going to buy a house, you're selling a house, you're selling a car. There's some things in there that are helpful, but it's not purpose built for that either. This is a B2B commercial terms negotiating framework that makes you feel good, that builds trust, causes you to discount less, makes your forecast more accurate. And I'm telling you, it doesn't take long to figure this out and scale it. It's so easy.
I've been using it myself since we first talked about it. That's how simple it is.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. I've
this is
had people, again, all the time that tell me that they've been using it for years because they saw me talk about it for 60 seconds on a podcast or something, right? It's supposed to be like, of course, that's stupid easy, right? But then I wrote a whole book about it. The book, though, is designed to teach the framework. And then I literally go through chapter by chapter how to handle each thing that a customer is going to ask for. It's too expensive. We need to pay slower. Net 60, net 90. We want to pay quarterly. We want to pay monthly. We need a termination provision. We want to do a pilot. We found an alternative that's 75% cheaper. Match it. All of those things, renewals, upsells. I've kind of built through each one of those pieces so that you kind of have exactly what to say, but it'll become very simple very quickly, and you won't need to go back to the book. It'll just become a part of the way that you talk about and negotiate pricing.
The way good frameworks are supposed to work. Awesome. Awesome. Well, last question. Why is this the book you needed to write now?
Well, I believe that, like we had talked about with even my first book, The Transparency Sale, like we've always known that transparency sells better than perfection, right? I found quotes from the 1700s that talk about being honest and being truthful. But if you told a lie, even up into the 1990s, and they found out, what are they going to do? Write a letter, call an 800 number? Like there's not much of a problem there. We have gotten to a point where this acceleration of peer connections, the acceleration of AI exposing pricing models, that makes me feel like we should have always been negotiating this way, but now it's infinitely more important because it is no longer sustainable to have every one of your customers paying a different amount. It just can't sustain. I believe that this is a very simple way forward to make sure that we are getting ahead of that problem because it's already getting a little ugly. I'm telling you, wait about 5 years. If you don't have a consistent structure with flexibility within the levers, I think there's going to be some people in trouble, and hopefully we're getting ahead of it with a simple framework that scales really, really easily.
Awesome. I lied. I have one more important question to add, and this is the last one. Where can people buy it?
Everywhere. So it's being distributed through Simon and Schuster. So every retailer you can think of, Amazon, Book Authority, all those places, and it's in every format. Do have a little bad news though. For whatever reason, they didn't want me to read for the audiobook.
Get
So
out. Well, that's a little bit disappointing. I'm sensing the demand for in a black market for you reading your own material. But I'm sure there are other issues you'd have to negotiate, probably not in such good faith in
exactly.
order to win. So,
Yep.
hey man, best of luck. I can't wait to get my hands on it. It's going to be awesome. It always is, and I appreciate you sharing a few minutes with me today.
Anytime, my brother. Great seeing you.